His name is Jerry Ginsberg. He's Zooming to us from Boca Raton, Florida. So we're happy we have this technology so we can all learn from Jerry. So Jerry is a fantastic photographer who I met a year ago, almost to the day, in Tucson, Arizona, during the biennial conference of NANPA, which is North American Nature Photographers Association. So Jerry made a fantastic presentation on his national park photography, which is his specialty. And then I was lucky enough to have a portfolio review with Jerry. Jerry was generous with his time and taught me a little bit about lab color processing in Photoshop. And I was impressed when Jerry took a couple of my photos and said, would it be okay to show you what lab color processing can do? And I followed up with him, and one thing led to another. We decided it would be great if Jerry could offer a little online workshop about the technique. I knew that my friends who were photographers would appreciate learning from Jerry. So just a little bit on Jerry's background. He's photographed every national park we have, which is, I think, a total now of 63 national parks in 29 states and 2 territories, 2 of them above the Arctic Circle, with a medium format film camera. Obviously, if we're talking about Photoshop, Jerry has been also photographing with the digital camera for at least 14 years, and even a little longer than that. So almost 20 years. So he has been very successful with his photography. He has had the cover photo on Sierra Magazine, Arizona Highways, American Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian, Wilderness Travel, Holland America. He also has Google and Wynn Hotels as clients. So without taking any more time away from Jerry, I would like to invite Jerry to share his screen and introduce us, please, to lab color processing in Photoshop. Oh, but before we start, Jerry has requested that we not interrupt his presentation with questions. I know you will have questions, but we're going to ask you to write your questions in the chat on the Zoom, and I will monitor the questions and ask Jerry to address some of the questions at designated intervals. But I hope all of that's clear, and we're looking forward to Jerry's presentation.
Kathy, thank you very much. First, let me express my thanks to ASMP and to Kathy Kelly for allowing me to offer this webinar. And I met Kathy, as she said, to be repetitive, at a NAMPA conference in Tucson last year. And I thank her for initiating and doing the yeoman work and organizing everything. And to Archie Carpenter and everyone else for holding my hand through Zoom and my ignorance of really getting my brain around Zoom. When Kathy and I began this discussion months ago, she mentioned that the lab book, the LAB book that I had recommended to her, subtitled The Canyon Conundrum, seemed a bit quote unquote dense, to use Kathy's word. At that point, I had not opened my copy of that book for several years. After diving back into it recently, I must agree with her assessment, right on point. Part of my goal tonight is to cut through a lot of this very arcane clutter and demonstrate the primary strengths of lab color so that we can all use it in the very worthwhile tool that it is in the targeted applications where it performs best. It's my pleasure to be here to share some of this information with you and hope that you will come away with new skills and a new impression for where and when the lab color space can fit within your workflow. Some of this material can sound a bit repetitive, so please, I hope you'll bear with me. As Kathy said, the questions should go into chat and she'll quarterback them and referee them as we go along. The book is written by Dan Margulis, M-A-R-G-U-L-I-S. It's the Lab Color book. It was published about 2006. There was a revision about 2 years later, version 2, which I've not looked at. I would opine that the book should be taken into chronological context within the present. While it probably remains as the Bible of the LAB color space, it was written long, long before the advent of Lightroom and many other raw converters with their easy-to-use color correction, noise reduction, and masking tools for local adjustments. One caveat, I'm told, I don't know, but I leave it up to the viewer's eye, that Zoom can mute the colors, which kind of takes the edge off a lot of what you may be seeing. I hope not. With today's monitor calibrating tools, both the data color and the X-Rite, now Calibrite Spider, the data color Spider and the Calibrite i1, and the fact that both the photographer and the viewer will view our images with what is anatomically and mostly functionally the very same optical system, we have a pretty good way to get the color right at the outset. While precise numerical values provided by the info palette in Photoshop are highly quantifiable, in my view, this is being a bit of overkill, at least for nature, travel, and most portrait photography. Having published at least 18 years ago, or been published at least 18 years ago, a fair portion of the techniques described in the book, such as airbrushing and the once dominant Cytec system, as well as ancient versions of the Photoshop CS series, are now well out of date. To my disappointment, the author also largely overlooks the simplicity and elegance of the masking capabilities of Photoshop layer masks, no matter what the chosen color space. All of that being said, nothing in my experience beats the LAB color space with its ultra-wide gamut for breaking up the colors of a largely monochromatic image, not to be confused with black and white, and creating a very desirable contrast within a single color while preserving detail, even when applying a fairly high degree of what amounts to, more or less, I'm misusing the term, saturation. It does this largely by completely separating, and this is the key thing, separating the functions of color and contrast. In LAB, color adjustments have no effect on contrast, and any contrast moves blessedly have absolutely zero effect on color. The A and B channels, as we shall see, deal solely with red, green, yellow, and blue, while the lightness or the L channel affects only contrast and definitely not color. So to begin, it's best, and I'm sure everyone here knows, to be shooting in RAW, nothing else, and processing in 16-bit files. Despite the maximum, your camera may only be 14, but you have two choices in Adobe, is 8 and 16. Always stick with 16 until the final derivative output. Now, everything we discussed tonight assumes proper monitor calibration, or as the agencies call it, monitor hygiene. I chuckled the first time I heard that one. Without that, without having the monitor, the display calibrated properly, all bets are off because your color, what you see is not going to be what you get. It may be close, but it won't be the best you can get. Dell Ultra Sharp although reputed to be good monitors, seem to be confined to sRGB from what I've learned recently, which is a much too narrow gamut to really appreciate everything in your images. Even then, very few monitors, even without that, very few monitors, even the high-end ISOs and calibrites, provide a gamut wide enough to show no more than perhaps 93 or 95% of the available colors. So to use RAW, we should go into with the idea that you've identified an image that is a candidate for LAB. Start in RAW, whatever the RAW converter of your preference is, whether it's Lightroom Classic or Lightroom quote unquote local or Camera RAW. Make as many edits as possible, except for contrast and saturation in your chosen RAW converter. This will allow you to preserve the pristine raw nature of the file as long as possible before opening it in Photoshop. Once opened in Photoshop, we can never go back. It'll never be raw again going forward. The current generation of masking capabilities is very good, but the mask defaults are a little small for my taste in Lightroom and Camera Raw. Using two monitors, one for images and one for the palettes and the tools, give us much more real estate on which to work, and better view of the image. The one major drawback of the various RAW converters is, and this is one of my pet issues, the absence of blending modes. We're going to go into blending modes a little down the road. Using the proper blending mode can make a big difference in the final product. It's important, and this is the key initial metric to start with. Get the white balance as close to perfect as possible. In RAW, do not apply too much contrast or saturation here, or it will likely interfere with the special talents of LAB if you decide to go into lab later in the process. But please get the white balance right. I would like to share with you a couple of presets that I have come up with recently. Let's see if I can get to this and go into Camera Raw. Look, we know that a lot of people are using Lightroom Classic. Millions of people are doing it. They can't all be crazy. It's just not my choice. The catalog is the short road to migraine headaches. And if you look around, you'll see that at least 80, maybe 90% of the problems that people have with Lightroom is when the catalog gets out of sync. But anyway, I promised a couple of presets. Number one, I would check in optics. I would always check remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. Every lens, no matter what you spend, has some inherent flaws, and this will help. Chromatic aberration, very few images these days really have chromatic aberration unless you have something very, very high contrast with a line across it. You may get an orange or a purple or a green halo along the edge. But there is no downside, absolutely no downside, excuse me, to leaving that checked on all images. The other two things are in detail. And under detail, we have sharpening and noise reduction. Noise reduction is luminance and color. In my opinion, now look, you're only getting, I can only offer my opinion, hard won through a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge out there with 100 people with 200 opinions. It's not my place to say who's right and wrong. I am happy to share with you my experience and my opinion. It's as good or as bad as anyone else's. In sharpening, I would turn it down to 0. In both luminance and color noise, I would turn them down to 0 on import. Why? Because you're going to sharpen later, and you may or may not need noise reduction. Noise reduction can't help the image because it's based on softening the detail. If you don't need it, don't use it. And as far as sharpening, and as far as and noise reduction as well, I have a problem with making one adjustment on top of another, on top of another. In my view, the image is best, the end product of the image will be the best if we can get it out of Adobe with one adjustment per category and not multiple iterations of sharpening or noise reduction. I'm sorry, did someone speak? Okay. There is another viewpoint. And for this, I take no responsibility. I just share it with you to throw it out there for your consideration. There's a photographer in California named Michael Fry, who is absolutely fabulous on landscapes. He's a terrific photographer. He's very unusual because the way I express it, he's left-brained and right-brained. He's both a great artist and a great processor in terms of the science and the math behind all of the programs. His opinion is as follows. In Camera Raw and in Lightroom, start with -1 full stop of exposure, -33 points of contrast, and +25 black. And his opinion, derived from someone else, excuse me, is that will get you to start at dead neutral, because he feels that the neutral parameters, the native parameters in opening, Camera Raw, and Lightroom, where they are at 0, are not actually 0. There was already an adjustment applied, and he does not wish to apply an adjustment on top of an adjustment on top of another adjustment, which is a good philosophy. If his metrics are correct or not, I don't know. I don't claim to know. But that's his opinion. He's very ardent about it, so I want to share it with you. I'm just going to take one quick sip to moisten my throat, and we'll keep going.
Jerry,
Yes,
could you, so is that Michael Fry, Frye?
that's correct.
Okay. And can you repeat his formula for us if we were taking
Yes.
notes?
It is -1 stop of exposure,
Okay.
-33 negative contrast, and +25 black.
Okay, thank you.
That's his starting point. So try it. I share it with you with no comment, no further comment, no other comment. Let's jump into color here, because I've rearranged these palettes a little bit, these panels. In temperature and tint, these are our tools, obviously, to set the white balance from wherever it's as shot or wherever else. Or auto is not a bad starting point, but we want to get to white balance and get rid of any possible tint or color cast before we start. Vibrance is useful in many cases. It's intelligent. It's got two pieces of intelligence. One is that it will gradually saturate the most undersaturated colors greater than the more saturated colors. So it tries to balance the saturation. The saturation slider right here is something that I personally advise on ignoring. Do not use it. It's like a sledgehammer. It saturates everything evenly. If you have a portrait, you're going to turn Aunt Millie into a red-boiled lobster. And the fault of saturation is that if too many people think that if a little is good, a lot is better. But in reality, what happens with too much saturation in any context, this slider or Photoshop or the color mixer or anywhere else, it tends to turn colors, if oversaturated, into nothing but a puddle of color with no detail, like the mercury in a thermometer. And we all know what that looks like. And if you'll notice, well, we'll get to that. In detail, in curve, you will notice that there is now a slider. If we move this a little bit, there's now a slider right below the curve dialog, refine saturation. Because if anybody's familiar with blending modes in Photoshop, you know that every adjustment layer comes into existence in the normal blending mode. Curves is no different. The problem with using curves for contrast in a normal blend mode is that it can undesirably and unwittingly impact the color. This is not something you want to do. You want to, in Photoshop, and we'll go through the blending modes in a minute, make sure that curves, if you're using it for tonality and not color, is affecting only that tonality and contrast and not the color. So that would be the appropriate blending mode would be luminosity. But this was added, oh, I guess a year and a half or 2 years ago, because they realized, or people put Adobe Wise to it, that, let's see if I can drag this off the line. Yep. That the using curves for luminosity, for contrast, was impacting the color. Now, if you want to use curves for color correction, there are red, green, and blue channels. That's a different discussion. That's one way of eliminating a color cast and getting white balance. Not the easiest, but it does work. It works here and it works in Photoshop. Okay, we're going to talk about the blending modes and the appropriate ones for each one. In my opinion, the color mixer in RAW and in Lightroom is really a great step forward. Again, the problem is, this is probably, we assume, absent evidence to the contrary, in the normal blend mode. If we were using the color mixer, if there was such a thing as color mixer in Photoshop, and we'll address that later, we would use the color blend mode. Here it's the normal blend mode. So even though we have hue and saturation and luminance, which can be 3 separate panels of 8 color channels each, or clicking all, you should get 24 sliders. Kind of cumbersome to do it that way, but it works. If you're in the normal blend mode, you have to really be very careful with what you're doing. The hue obviously changes the color. Not that there's any red in this image, there isn't. Saturation increases and decreases saturation, and luminance is lightness. I wish Adobe would standardize on one set of terminology, because in different iterations, they call luminance and luminosity and lightness 3 different names, when in reality, it's all the same thing. So if they use one set of nomenclature, I think life would be a little easier. There is also added, maybe a year or so ago, the ability to use point color in here, which can be useful. It's a little hard to control, but it can be useful. And the way we use point color is, I think there are up to 5, maybe more now, choices with the eyedropper to identify a color. And this will give you a color picker. We can alter the hue, the saturation, and the luminance right here once this is expanded. The fact that, again, it's in the normal blend mode by default is not the greatest. Unfortunately, as of this moment, the color mixer is not yet in the masking panels of either Camera Raw or Lightroom. We have the point color, but not the color mixer. The color mixer can give you, I think, adequate color control. Where else are you going to find things like orange and aqua and purple? Nowhere that I know of. But again, do not use too much saturation or bring up too much color in your RAW processor. Just get the white balance right and the contrast, and do a little light cleanup. There's nothing wrong with retouching. Okay, jumping into Photoshop. Let's see if we can open this baby in Photoshop. It's thinking, oh, here we go. Okay, good. I do not have all of my, I'm gonna try to drag this panel. Okay, there we are. So I have, excuse me, my layers panel and adjustments and properties. This is all I need. I've been able to do, for better or worse, aside from retouching and cloning and the great remove tool and cropping, I've been able to do just about anything I need to do with 99.99% of my images in curves, in HSL, and in, where is it? Selective color.
Jerry, we're
aside from
seeing
maybe-
Bridge,
yeah.
excuse me, Jerry, we're seeing Bridge, not Photoshop.
I went to, wait, I'm screen sharing, I'm in Photoshop. It's, I see what the problem, I see there's a problem. I'm in Photoshop
Mhm.
and I see that it's sharing Bridge.
Right.
Help.
During our rehearsal, we did have to come out of camera
Oh,
raw
I got
and
it.
then
I got
select the window for
I
photo.
think I got it. I got it. I found it. I found it.
Very good.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I went to stop sharing and I had options and went from there. Okay, so lab aside, we're going to get to lab in a minute. Photoshop, as we know, is generally reserved for more heavy lifting as opposed to a raw converter, heavy duty retouching, tonality, contrast, and certainly sharpening. Photoshop for Photographers is the title of one of the courses that I teach. It's not original. We as photographers use maybe perhaps 20-25% of all Photoshop. For the rest of it is for graphic artists and especially pre-press and other disciplines. In my view, it's expressed in this book of the Canyon Conundrum with a bit of using curves in the A and B channels in a rather arcane workflow, in that it very largely overlooks, not completely, but largely overlooks the great power of layer masks. The old tools in here in the layer panel, like color balance and maybe photo filter and certainly levels, in my opinion, are old and clunky compared to the new, more elegant and precise tools. And I don't think too many people would lose much if they were discontinued and just removed. They can get rid of them. I know a lot of people still use levels. Frankly, I never have. I never quite got it. I never quite got the point when curves are so much more powerful. Okay, we talked about luminance, lightness, and luminosity being the same thing. Okay, layers, blending modes. My opinion and my experience tells me not to use the normal blending mode in anything. I use in curves if I'm doing contrast only. Where is curves, 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 curves? Should be near the top, but it isn't. Oh, there it is. No. There it is. I will go immediately from normal right into luminosity down at the bottom. And I know no matter what I'm doing, I will not affect the color if I do that. If I want to do color in curves, in the red, green, or blue channels, there's no point in going to red or blue with this image, it's all green. So up is more and down is less. And if you know the color wheel, you'll know that more green is less magenta. And down, oh, that's interesting, is less green and more magenta. Let's drag that point off the line. But we can do a lot of, we can also do auto. We can do a lot of color correction in curves in the channels. Once you get into color channels in curves, I would definitely stick to the color blending mode. If you want to increase the contrast and have a little fun, there's nothing wrong with trying overlay once in a while or soft light. Now, it looks a little garish, but the trick to using any layer or layer mask is the opacity slider. So it starts out at 100 and it's infinitely variable in 1% increments from 0 to 100. With this, you can do anything. So if this is too much, we knock it down and try it, move it around. You can't hurt anything. There's no way to break anything because with layers, you can always come back next week, next month, next year, have a new idea and refine it, change it, start again, do whatever you want. You're not breaking any pixels. This is a non-destructive, and that's the key word. It's a non-destructive workflow. Let's throw this layer away. In HSL, which is probably the most complicated in the bunch, we have 3 different sliders. We have hue, reminiscent of the color mixer in Camera Raw. The hue will change the color. The saturation will increase and decrease the saturation, and the lightness will identify the pixels in that color channel and lighten and darken them. Now, first of all, lightness used to be a poison pill. It was terrible years ago, but it's gotten an awful lot better. It's really nice. I would recommend very highly, if we double click on any arrow, it'll go back to null. Recommend if you go into hue to change the color, which is perfectly fine. This is the color wheel laid out in a horizontal strip. Change the blend mode from normal to hue. Not hard to remember. If you go into saturation, change the blend mode from normal or wherever you are to saturation. If you choose to go into lightness mode, which I find myself doing not once in a while, I would definitely use luminosity because it's not going to impact the color. When you see the garish things popping up as I mouse over these other things, it's showing what they do. Some of them I wouldn't bother with, but it's nice to see what they do. Down here, if we go, oh, by the way, I recommend that you never use this master. Take the color channel that you want to affect. Do not use the master. It's like a sledgehammer. When you choose a color channel, you will see these 4 bumpers pop up. In my opinion, this is an easier and more precise way of defining the area of the spectrum that you're influencing, that you're affecting, even more so than point color in Camera Raw. You can move these 4 bumpers around with a mouse or a pen or what have you to your heart's content. Anything in between the inner 2 is being affected 100%. Anything between the inner and the outer on the left and the right, I hope everyone sees that, is being feathered and affected to a diminishing extent. So you can spread these out, you can draw them closer, you can move them around completely. It's really a very, very flexible and easy way to precisely define that portion of the spectrum, be it narrow or wide, that you choose to affect at that moment. But if you're going to do that, please use the right, and you're only when you're in a channel. If you go back to master, they're going to disappear because you're affecting the whole enchilada from end to end. So I urge you to use whatever channel you need at the moment. Okay, selective color. Very, very rarely used by most people, I'm sure, not well understood, but very powerful. Selective color is somewhere. Okay, now that's the channel mixer. That's not what I want. Selective color, here we go. Okay, you must pick a channel. We have red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, white, neutral, and black. Where else do you find white, neutral, and black? Pick a channel, whatever it may be. Let's say here we're in green. And you then have the same 4 sliders in all of those channels: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Leave absolute check, not relative. When you're in that channel and you're affecting that channel only, cyan is positive and negative. All of these sliders are positive and negative. If you have the color wheel in your head, you'll know that if you increase cyan, you're decreasing the opposite, which is not red. What would be the opposite? There is no opposite of cyan. You're increasing and decreasing cyan. In magenta, if you increase the magenta, you go this way. If you decrease the magenta, you're adding green. Yellow and blue are opposite. So if you increase yellow, you get yellow. If you decrease yellow, you get blue. Black is self-defining. The same thing with whites and neutrals. This is a great tool. Now, what's the benefit of this? First of all, I should mention, we should always, always, always use this in the color blending mode to get the best effect. Unlike saturation, whether it was the sledgehammer all colors slider or the master channel or even the individual color channels in saturation, they have a tendency, as I mentioned, to, if you overdo it, you can turn the color, the detail into a puddle of color. You're not going to like it. Conversely, in selective color, you can purify, my word, purify the color while retaining the detail. You don't want to sacrifice detail. So if we can purify the color and get the color we want and correct for any color cast and maintain the detail, in my view, that's a win-win. But it's important to use the color blend mode. Okay. Using color. If you go in any layer and use a layer mask, obviously every adjustment layer has a layer mask. And if you choose, for whatever reason, to brush on it, whoop, I didn't get a brush. There's a brush. Oh, I'm blowing low opacity. Now we should do low opacity. That's a whole different discussion. I'm trying to juggle the header on the Photoshop screen with the zoom. Okay. For the sake of illustration, we'll bump this up to 100, which is something I wouldn't normally do. And we can see that this is creating a mask right in here, excluding this area from the layer. So black hides and white reveals. What I wanted to illustrate is that if we turn the eyeball on and off, we're affecting not only the entire layer, but really the mask, once the mask is less than 100% of the layer. And that, if we affect the opacity, we're affecting only what's white. Now, if it's black, it's blocked. If it's white, it's revealed. And any variable percentage gray is what it is. If we were to brush with 50% for the sake of argument, it would affect at 50%. Any questions on any of this so far?
There's one question from Kevin. Is this image still in Adobe RGB color space or have
Yes,
you
it is.
switched
Yeah.
to lab?
Yeah, no, this is RGB, and we're just about to jump into LAB.
Okay.
So I appreciate everybody bearing with me for this long-winded speech.
Well, I think it's great to have the background that or the foundation that you're laying, Jerry. I just wanted to ask you to clarify one thing when you were talking about HSL. You
Yes,
said in hue, change the blend mode to hue, and then in saturation and lightness. So change the blend mode to which? In saturation?
I would use hue. For the hue slider, I would use the hue blending mode.
Okay,
The saturation blending mode.
okay,
Some people say you can also use color, but why not use saturation? It's more precise.
okay,
Or lightness or luminosity, whatever it is today, I would definitely use the luminosity blending mode, which will not, and should not affect the color per se, but only the tonality and the luminosity of the color channel. Now, when I say color channel, as I showed, first we're in HSL, I think. No, we're not. We're in color. We're in selective color. Let's turn this off. Let's go back. Let's make a HSL. Come on, boys and girls. HSL layer, okay? So the lightness would be in luminosity. So change this from normal to luminosity. And at the same time, once you choose a channel, as opposed to the whole image globally, you can then define what width of the color wheel of the spectrum that you want to affect and to what degree.
Okay.
These little bumpers, I call them, I don't know what Adobe calls them. I don't know if they have a better name. I've always called them bumpers, are really a wonderful tool.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just to repeat, inside the two inners, the color channel you've selected is affected 100%, and between the inner and the outer on both sides here, and the inner and the outer on the other side there, they're affected to a diminishing degree as you go outward.
Right. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay, now let's go to lab. Let's take all of these layers and let's throw them away into the trash. I hope they're using recycling here. Just kidding. Okay, now let me demonstrate. I want to go back to Bridge. I'm screen sharing. I don't want to go stop share. How do I, tell me again? Oh, new share, right. Okay, let's go back to Bridge. This is what I want to show. Share, just to give you an initial representation. Let's do this and this here. Now, I hope that this dialogue doesn't block too much of the image. This is one of our little critters here in Florida. This is a raw, untouched file. This is processed in RGB. This is pumped up in RGB. Watch it carefully. The next one is going to be the same image, same file in LAB. So you see that it has a tremendous amount of increased color. Let's go back to that. Let's escape this and let's go to this guy. Oh no, I see it won't open in RAW. Okay, I see the problem. It's a PSD. Or it will probably, okay. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so this guy is really pumped up. Now, I'm sure that I used, and we can see.
Jerry, excuse me, we're still seeing Bridge.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, okay. I have to stop share. And now I have to go to new share. Which one? Okay, let's do this one. As much as I like to think I know about Photoshop, it's probably the inverse of what I know about Zoom. Okay, so this guy is really pumped up, and I'll show you how I got there. But one thing to remember, the key move, one of the key moves in LAB, I know it comes last and I'm saying it first, is my trusty friend, the opacity slider. So in my view, there is no harm in overdoing an adjustment layer to excess. Go much further than you really want it to be. And then knock down the opacity until you find the happy medium. This is it's like a magic wand in all of these things. not only in LAB, but really in any adjustment layer. Fair enough? Okay. So let's look at how we got here. Let me see if I can switch back now to camera raw. I have to go to new share, but I didn't. So let's go to share. Let's go here and let's go to share. Maybe this will work. Okay, good. So again, this one is the original raw file with nothing done to it. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. This is flat. And I meant to mention, when you go from RGB into LAB, two things, two important points to remember, very key. Number one, start with a flat image. Years ago, when I was scanning a lot of film, Nikon tech rep would always tell me to make all my adjustments before I scanned it so that I could bring it into Photoshop with the adjustments already baked in and save myself a lot of work. And the same thing with the HDR and things like photomatics and pixel mapping. There are a million different variations that you can use to tweak the image before you actually process it and produce the end result. I would rather, my druthers would rather take an image that's not too contrasty and not too saturated and bring it into Photoshop just the way you see it, flat. Nothing wrong with flat, for the simple reason that once I bring it into Photoshop flat, I can use adjustment layers to my heart's content. I can use too many, I can make them too strong, I can turn them on and off, I can junk some, I can create more, I can come back at any time in the future and redo it or tweak it or change it however I want. Conversely, if I brought it in to a scan into Photoshop, scan film, or processed in HDR or in lab and had it, or brought it from RGB into lab and had it too pumped up in either color or contrast, I would really be starting at a disadvantage in that I would be unable to reverse those things later. So I like a nice flat image. So here is the original raw file untouched. Let's do this. Okay, let's do it this way. Here. This will probably be the best way, no, it won't, to show you these in, let's do this. Unfortunately, the PSD is not gonna, the LAB is not gonna open in camera raw. Okay, let's do this. So if we do this, okay, here's the raw. Here it is processed in RGB in raw, and here it is output in RGB as a TIFF. So let's start with the raw, and this is the way it works. Let's open it in Photoshop. I'm going to switch my share. I'm getting better at this. I'm not good, but I'm not as bad as I was. New share. Okay. So I hope that everybody can see it now in Photoshop.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. The big rub with this, and there is a drawback, in that when you convert it, anything from RGB to lab or vice versa, from lab into RGB, and you have a beautifully, masterfully created layered file, you cannot, Photoshop will not allow you to go between RGB and LAB in either direction while saving the layers. It must be flattened. You have no choice. Big drawback. So what I do very simply is duplicate the image. Well, right here, okay. Duplicate the image and start again. So it's a copy. If I had the RGB layers on the other one, they would be preserved. So now the easy way, there's an easy way and a more detailed way of doing this. The way I've done it is to go to image. This is where the action starts. Go to image mode, and you can see that you have choices between RGB, CMYK, which is for offset, and lab. Click lab. You're now in lab. It jumped, but nothing changed. The way the book recommends doing this, let's go back to where we were. Come on. Now my mouse is slowing down. I just put a new battery in. Go back to RGB. The way the book recommends doing this is going to edit, convert to profile. Oh, this started in sRGB. That's crazy. Destination space is LAB. Engine is Adobe Ace. Relative color metric. Use black point compensation. Uncheck dither. Check preview. So we're going to go back over this. I'm sure that I did it too quickly. This is the more detailed way of converting from RGB to lab. Okay, now we're in lab. The simple, easy way of doing this, you're not going to believe how easy this is going into adjustments, make a curves layer. This time, I'm going to contradict myself. There's no harm in leaving this blend mode in normal, because you're going to be doing so many things, nothing else fits. You will see that in the channels, instead of master or RGB, you have three options in the drop down: lightness, A, and B. Lightness is contrast only, does not affect color. The A channel is red and green, or green and magenta. The blue channel is strictly blue and yellow. So if we start with the A channel, one thing we can do, if you'll notice the curves dialog, as always, let's give this a little more space. The curves dialog is in 4 columns of 25% width each. We can use that. One option is to click the Alt or Option key and click in the dialog, and it changes the grid from 4 columns to 10 columns at 10% each, allowing you to make a more precise adjustment. It's optional. It's nice, but it's optional. Now, this is the A channel. If I grab this point, which is red, and I move this over, let's say an arbitrary amount for now of 2 squares, and I move the green channel an arbitrary degree, matching it precisely 2 squares. And the visual check is to make sure that the curves dialog, this line, is still bisecting the very, very dead center of the curves dialog grid. That will enable you to affect both colors equally. If for any reason, and you may do this intentionally or accidentally, you move one more than the other. So here I've moved the green to impact the image with much more effect than the red. You'll see that this curves dialog is way off the center of the grid because I want to make it greener. What if I don't want to make it greener? Leave the 2 of them at the same point. What if I only want to impact or affect one and not the other? Let's say I want to just affect the red and not the green, or I want to affect them at 2 different degrees. I can put a point on the line in the center, and you'll notice that my input and output just changed because I wasn't precise. So if I use my down arrow key, I can now align the input and output and get them equal, so I know that I'm in the center of the grid. Now, if I want to move the red more than the green, if I was smart, I would put a couple of anchor points on the line below the center. Come on, boys and girls. To help stabilize the point of the green, because otherwise it could get very wrinkly and be a problem. So now I can move the red and hopefully not affect the green. And there we are. I know it's Garrett. Oh, I said the green moved. I didn't have enough anchor points. So now, what? Come on, boys and girls. Okay, now if I move this, I'm affecting the red, and I'm really holding the green pretty steady. The idea is to revolve around the center point. There's no downside at any time to putting a point on the line in the center. Just make sure that if you do that, your input and output numbers are the same. Here, they're not. Oh, I'm sorry for this. Okay, so right here, I have input and output equal numbers, so I have a straight line. Doesn't look straight, but it theoretically is. Let's move this over. I'm about 2.5, 22% over. That looks about right. Okay, that's green and red. I've affected color, but not contrast. Now, if I go to the B channel, same dialogue, we have blue and yellow. I can affect both of them the same degree. I can affect all four the same degree. I can affect the four of them to different degrees. So let's begin with a point maybe in the center. And you see that the input and output numbers are different. So let's equalize them. Whoop. No, I'm on the wrong box. Okay. Now, if I move this over, let's say 20%, which is 2 of the 10% boxes in the grid. And I move this over the same 20%. Presumably, I have not affected the color at all. I have not changed the color balance, the white balance. I've made them more intense. Now, just for the heck of it, if we click this eyeball on and off, the layer eyeball on and off, you can see the change we've made. So it really is a question of quote unquote saturation, but with no loss of detail. I also haven't gone bananas. There's no loss of detail and there's no change in the contrast or tonality. I'm affecting only the color. Now, if we go from the B channel to the lightness channel, this again is contrast only and not color. So here, go heavy, don't be afraid, make an exaggerated curve that you probably wouldn't want to use in real life. No harm done. I wouldn't want the line to touch the edge of the box. And this looks pretty garish. This is the pièce de résistance, our friend, the opacity slider. So everything in those three channels is now composited in one image, and I can influence the opacity of the change anywhere I want to any variable degree with great precision. I've got 100 different increments to which I can change this. So again, here's the flat raw capture, and here's the finished product in LAB. And if you don't like 70% opacity, which I grant you seems a little strong, and the greens are really dark, we can knock it down to 50. Maybe we like that better. Maybe we should make the oranges stand out more. Fine. Go back to the A channel and give the red a little boost. Now we have more orange than we did a minute ago. Okay, let's stop for questions.
Okay, I have to apologize that at one point my screen got messed up and I can't read the chat box. Can you read it, Archie?
No,
I'm going to exit and re-enter the meeting. Can you let me back in, Archie?
Yes, go. I can hear you fine though, but continue.
Okay. Yeah, my screen has just got miniature and I can't seem to make it go back to normal. So I'll leave and come back.
The only question is from Kevin. Is do you ever stack the lab adjustments?
I'm not clear on how he's using the word stack.
So, well, I'll jump in and use my voice here. So, I guess I'm asking, you're using the three channels within one adjustment layer. Do you ever separate them onto separate adjustment layers so that you could play with the opacity? Is there any detriment to that?
It doesn't work that way. You really, it's important to do all three in one layer. Now, you could add a second layer. We can do multiple things. If you have, let's say for the sake of argument, too great an adjustment in one, you could do, let me think this through. You could do the A on one layer and then make another layer with the B and do two completely different opacities, yes, but it shouldn't be necessary for the simple reason that you can impact the points on the curve on the A and B totally differently. If you wanted to lessen the opacity below 100%, you have the slider. If you create a terrific layer that you really like, but it's not strong enough, theoretically you could increase anything, or you could duplicate the layer with everything intact by hitting Command or making that layer active, highlight it, and then hit Command or Control J and duplicate that layer, and then reduce the opacity of that. So, for example, if you had a wonderful lab layer with all three channels, and it was at 100%, but it wasn't enough, you could duplicate that layer and then take the second one, the copy of that layer, and reduce the opacity to 50%, just to take a hypothetical arbitrary number. And then you would have 1.5 times the original adjustment. I'm afraid I'm not, let me go back to your question. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I guess the, my premise is if I wanted to do the adjustments to the A channel separate from the B channel so that I could easily just turn them on and off by clicking the layer active.
You could do that. Yes, you could do that. You could absolutely do that. But in that case, you would use, let's say, the first layer, you would do the A channel only, and the second layer, you would do the B channel only. You could do that. There's no law against it, but yeah, okay. I've never seen it done, but I think it's definitely worth trying. You can certainly, you don't have to, you move the 4 color points the same degree. You can make them all 4 the same. You can make 2 the same. You can make 3 the same. You can make 1, you can move 1 and leave the other 3 alone. But it's all a question of maintaining the proper color balance. Now, in the book, if you ever pick up this book, I noticed the other day on Amazon, The second issue is selling used soft cover for about $95. So I guess it's long out of print and they think they can get it. He talks in the book, and it is really very dense, about all kinds of tweaks, local tweaks within the layer without using a mask that's all geared at pre-press. Now, if we're doing, hypothetically, like I do, landscape and a lot of travel, and once in a while, very rarely, a real portrait, I will use layer masks like crazy. I have one hanging in the house that my wife loved. It's an orchid from Hawaii that before I finished output the file, before I flattened it, I had about 50 layers on it without exaggeration. So you can tweak those on and off to your heart's content, obviously, in masks and softening and so forth. But what he talks about in the book is local adjustments by using the curve, which I found very archaic. I would much rather use masks and paint and brush on the layer masks, which you can certainly do to your heart's content. And you can certainly have multiple curves layers in LAB. There's nothing to stop you. And that's the best way to make the local adjustments to your heart's content. Just use layer masks how you would in any other context. When he talks about pre-press in the books, you know, with rich crackers, they have a specific red and blue and yellow, and it's a critical match. In many years in corporate America, with not being a printer, not being involved in printing, but buying the printing, I bought, I guesstimate, somewhere between 5 and 6 billion with a B pieces of print, advertising, and direct response and so forth. And I was very happy using PMS matches in my PMS book that changed every year. And I would get a match that was more than adequate for my purpose, and I could do it by eye with a PMS book. And even with some very, very outlandish colors, we could match the colors with PMS. So I wouldn't worry, if you pick up the book, I wouldn't worry about what he does with a lot of convoluted colors and or local adjustments using the numbers in the info palette. I haven't used the info palette in close to 20 years. It's very nice, but I would much rather have a calibrated monitor and do it by eye. That's me. Did I help, Kevin? Kevin?
Sorry, I
Hello?
was muted. Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, I hope. If you have a follow-up question, please don't hesitate. Anyone else? Nobody else? Okay, there will be a pop quiz. We'll be distributing questionnaires in a minute. Just kidding. Just kidding. But for the beauty of layers and layer masks, we can get just about anything done, believe me.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
How often do you flatten your images with such that many layers, 50 layers, upwards of to your heart's content? Like
Okay.
how much do you flattening to, because I know once you get a lot of layers, you can get files that are like in the gigabytes and stuff, and it's just crazy to work on and stuff.
Well, yes, and that's a workflow question. I'm going to address that. My general MO is as follows. I save anything with layers as an archived permanent PSD. If I am going to send it out, whether it's to print or the web or email or to the copyright office or to an agency, I'm going to duplicate the image and I'm going to flatten the duplicate and size it accordingly and save it either as a TIFF or a JPEG or 8 or 16-bit or whatever I need. But that's the duplicate. I can throw it away. I have the permanent archived image and I'm perfectly happy to save it at 50 layers. Now, adjustment layers, unlike pixel layers, are empty. They will increase the file size minimally, but if you duplicate an image layer, a pixel layer, you're going to double the file size. If you keep adding empty adjustment layers, you're going to increment the total file size, but only minimally. When I had, and it breaks my heart to have sold them, I had two Linhof Technica 617 panoramic cameras with 5 or 6 lenses. They only made 4 lenses, but I had 5. I would scan the 617 in sections on a 6x9 Nikon film scanner, put it together, and start out with no adjustment layers, nothing else, just a raw scan trimmed, was about a 2 gigabyte raw scan once I stitched it together. So now a PSD only goes up, it may have changed recently, I don't know, but for years, a PSD only went up to 2 gigabytes. If you want to go beyond 2 gigabytes, it's a PSB as in baby, which is fine. Just make sure that in preferences in Photoshop, or maybe it's called settings in Apple, you change the compatibility to always. Don't ask, don't maybe. And PSD and PSB compatibility, I forget what page it's on in the preferences, change it to always, and it'll always be there. Now, to your point about gigabyte files, yes, you're absolutely right. It's easy to get up to a gigabyte depending upon how big your camera is. I mean, I saw somebody the other week with a Hasselblad, 100 megapixel, 90 megapixel Hasselblad. He can get to a gigabyte without too much trouble. But to be honest with you, the storage has become so inexpensive. Years and years ago, I think I'm a lot older than you are. At least you look a lot younger than I do.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
When I started with digital, I had a commercial account with CompUSA, and I thought I was a real hotshot rock star when I bought a 160 gigabyte external hard drive. Today, I think my phone has almost that much. So that has become a de minimis. I'm a bargain hunter. I shop Thanksgiving week, whether it's Black Friday or Cyber Monday or what have you. I look for bargains. I bought last fall, on a very famous online camera retailer on the west side of Manhattan, who shall remain
Nice.
nameless. 2 16 terabyte hard drives for about $160 each. Guys, it doesn't get any cheaper. You can go into one of the wholesale clubs. There's one near me. It begins with a C. They're headquartered in Washington State, and buy a little tiny 5 terabyte portable hard drive about the size of a pack of cigarettes for about $90. So I don't have a problem with 2, 3, 4 gigabyte files. I really don't care. To me,
Okay.
I'm thrilled that I don't come home from a 3-week trip and find a processing bill for $2,000. So after that, everything is gravy.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Anyone else?
There's a question in the chat that says, what monitor do you use, Jerry?
I have, it's getting old now. It's only 24 inches. It's an ISO monitor, and it has its own built-in software and brightness controls. And I have a big hood on it to shield me from window light and any ambient light. And it's a great monitor. I think that ISO, if I had to buy another monitor tomorrow, I'd buy another ISO. And I also have, by the way, a little El Cheapo $150 whatever off-the-shelf monitor, 2-monitor setup, so that I have the image only on the ISO graphics monitor, and it gives me more real estate. And I have all the palettes on the second little garden variety monitor. I don't care if the colors are off because it doesn't matter. I don't have any images there.
Okay,
So ViewSonic is good, Dell is good, they all work. Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna turn up my light a little bit so I can read my notes and hope to heaven that the light doesn't impact the screen. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, that's better. Okay, that's better. Okay. The lights were glaring off the screen earlier. Okay, let's see. Questions about going from RGB into LAB, whether it's the easy way or the more detailed way. Anybody? Okay. The grid, changing the grid from 4 columns to 10. What did I say? The Alt key? No. Yeah, it was the Alt key. Now it's not changing back. Anyway, the 10 columns are more precise. The idea is, and this is what a better way to state it, better than I have, is that if you have especially a monochromatic image, let's get out of this guy and let's look at something else. Here, oh, this is a good one. Okay, has anybody been to the wave?
no,
You know what I have to do? Wait, I have to fix the share. I keep thinking that I can just do this. Where do I find the new share button? Screen sharing, stop share. Archie, help me.
You were within Photoshop, so we saw what you were seeing. So do that, do what you just did again. File, open recent, and go to the waves,
Oh, right, okay, yeah, you know what? That's right.
because you did not
I
leave
did
the
I did
program.
my prep work and then I forgot about it. You're right. Okay. Um,
And the rest, and Kathy, confirm that we're seeing what the correct thing once it pops up.
Okay.
Right, because it's camera raw and Photoshop, not Bridge, right.
Yeah.
I outsmarted myself. I messed up in reverse. Okay,
okay,
so this is the wave. It's right about on the Utah-Arizona line. It's a great hike. Don't do it in the summer, you'll fry. It's a wonderful spot. Unfortunately, it's become too popular and too well known. Used to be really an unusual thing. This is dramatic red rock. Now, if we go into camera raw with the raw capture, this is a TIFF. I wouldn't even change the color. I would just, let's say, open this in Photoshop. It's coming. Okay. Now, the beauty of this is the whole point of this exercise in going into lab. Oh, come on. Where was I going with this? Image, mode, LAB. Okay, now, the beauty and the main application of LAB for, in my opinion, landscape, nature, and travel photography. And I remember Kathy had one great one, was a couple of, I think they were flamingos. Red, pink, flamingo, yeah, they're flamingo colored against green or turquoise water. And each area was monochromatic and she had a terrific color contrast. But what the idea is, if you have a monochromatic, and I don't mean black and white, I mean color that's mostly one color, the idea is to drive these colors apart. Because here it looks flat, which it is. So if we take this and we go into curves, which are right here. And we do this simple, the easiest way. Go into curves, start with the A channel, push the red over to some degree, push the green over to the same degree, making sure that you're still bisecting the center of the dialogue. Go to B, wash, rinse, repeat, as one of my students like to say. Yellow, blue. Now go to lightness, or they call it the L channel also, same difference. You may see it referred to as the L channel. This is not good. This is not good. Let's pull this down. I'm not happy with this result at all. Let's start again. A, come on. Probably pump up the reds a little bit. B, no harm, no foul. Lightness. Let's start to drag these points off the line. We're in the normal mode. Start with this, bring this back. And we can now, it's too light. It's really too light. So let's not make an S curve. Let's go up here to the meat of the pixels and bring it down. Now the blue is really outrageous. I think you'll agree. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And we can now play with this. But the beauty is, if we just click this eyeball on and off, look what we've done in about under 60 seconds. These reds, these rocks have come alive. And if I went back to the A channel, I think I would push the red over even more. Actually, what I'm going to do is bring this back. I'm going to put this point here. I'm going to reduce the green, which just showed up in the sky as a really obnoxious cyan. See, now I've got a lot more red than green. Everybody see that?
Mhm.
Okay. Now go to B just to see what it looks like. That's fine. The sky is still obnoxious. Go to lightness. Forget the sky for a minute. We'll fix that in a minute. But this is what the wave really looks like. And that was a terrible, terrible start. This is awful. This is terrible. But this is what you can do. The idea is to drive the reds apart to create that contrast. And I did it in the blue, but it's way over the top. So what we are going to do is go back to the B channel and reduce the blue. Now, if we go to lightness, probably bring this down. A little lightening over here wouldn't hurt. Now the sky looks a lot better. And we can certainly use a mask. If we used a brush at 50% opacity, I got a black brush, and I go into this. I'm going to do a very fast, down and dirty, sloppy brushing job. I'm not trying to be precise. And take off a little of that blue. I'm on 50% opacity. So I'm reducing the opacity of the LAB change to the sky by half. Probably looks more presentable. Not the greatest layer mask in the history of Adobe, but it works. And if you wanted to check your work, click on the layer on the mask. Make sure you're on the mask and hit, I think it's the, right, the alter option panel, a button, key, and the mask, and you can see the actual mask. There it is. Anybody else? Okay, another interesting point that Mr. Margolis brings up is as follows. To select the pixels, if you wanted to measure anything and you go into the eyedropper tool, I hope I got the right eyedropper. The idea is go to the options bar and you'll see the point sample. To go to 1 pixel can be very erroneous. You don't know that that 1 pixel is representative of the area that you want to impact. So take this drop down in the sample size and change it to 3 by 3 or 5 by 5. Now you have a 25 pixel patch from which to select, and you're much, much, much more likely to get an accurate sample. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, he talks about sharpening in the book. First of all, I don't like the way he does it with going into channels and going into the L channel and just sharpening the L channel. My preference to sharpening, assuming that you want to print something, is to get this all done. Get it sized. If you wanted to print a 20 by 30, whatever it happens to be, size that first, whether it's in Photoshop or Gigapixel or Perfect Resize or Genuine Fractals or whatever, and size it, and then sharpen that to size at 100% on the screen. Because otherwise, you're prone to having halos or inadequate sharpening or over sharpening or who knows what. But always size it first and do it on a separate layer. Then I would duplicate the layer. Now, to answer, to go back, to circle back to Tripp's question, if I were going to make another pixel layer, an image layer, and put it on top of this and just sharpen that layer to avoid damaging the archive file, I would sharpen that layer. I would then duplicate it. I would either flatten it or make a composite layer with what is it? Control Alt Shift E, if I recall correctly, will give you a composite layer on top, and that will increment the total file size by the size of the original image, no question. And then get it printed and then get rid of that. Either delete the layer, go back to the archive file, or flatten it and save it for that size. And then if you want to make another print in a different size, then go ahead and size it again. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. But the important thing to remember is this. The degree, just like in curves and anything else, the degree of contrast, and I'm using the word a little liberally when I say color contrast. Color contrast in the real sense is using both ends of the spectrum, cool colors and warm colors. So for the sake of this discussion, let's say that if you drive these colors apart in a monochromatic image, you're creating a color contrast. In a strictly technical sense, that's not correct, but in the vernacular, it's usable. That color contrast is driven solely by the steepness of the line, of the partial line between the 2 points. The steeper the line, the bigger the contrast. I don't think this is going to reverse itself. No, used to do it in the old Photoshop. They've improved Photoshop so much that it doesn't do a lot of the stuff it used to do. Thanks. But it's the steepness of the line. That's what you're looking for. So we're dealing with multiple effects, different effects, when moving the points in the A and B channels. Moving all 4 points to the same degree will maintain the original color or white balance. And if you don't start out with the white balance, you're starting out behind. This is a bit, I don't mean this as a pun. You're starting out behind the curve. You're starting out with a deficit. So get the white balance right going into LAB. It'll save you a lot of work later. Moving all 4 points to the same degree will maintain the original color or the white balance. If the curve passes through the very center of the curve's dialogue, moving any of the 4 points to a greater degree will increase the influence of that color. Moving either curve away from the center of the curve's dialogue will alter the white balance. So if I move the red, again, far more than the green, and I'm way off the center here. If I were smart, what I would have done was brought this back. That's really good. That's really bad. Whew. Let's go back to here. Let's drag this off the line. Let's start at null. Put a point on the line. Make a bunch of anchor points. As many as you want, they're cheap. Now, I think I'm a little bit high on that one. That's better. Okay. Now you can move the red, hopefully without moving the green. Moving the red, moving the red. I haven't moved the green. Now if I come in to the yellow channel, I can make, let's drag these off the line and start again. So you see by this histogram that most of my pixels are piled up right in this quarter tone. So if I want to make this lighter, I'm going to really kill the image. So let's go down here and make this a little darker. Now that's brilliant. And now knock down the opacity. Here we are at, whoops. I would say just about here, give or take. That's probably a pretty decent representation of what this rock looks like. Has anybody ever been there? Anybody on this call ever been there?
I've been to Moab, just a little another place in Utah, similar, but not as breathtaking as the way.
The turnoff from Route 89 is roughly halfway between Page, Arizona and Kanab, Utah. So just to give you, I'll tell you a good story. Just to go down this road from the highway, it's about 8 miles on a very good, well-graded gravel road. And then it's about a 2.5 mile hike in over bare rock. And if you don't know where you're going, you'll never find it, trust me. I went there a couple of years ago with an ABC TV news crew. So the cameraman and I are in the lead vehicle. And the 2 young ladies, the on-camera talent and the producer, were in another SUV behind us. And these are 2 real metropolitan, urban New York City girls, ladies. They're in their 20s, to me, they're girls. And by the time we parked, after 8 miles down a gravel road, they thought that they were in Siberia. They were never on unpaved roads in their lives. They thought they had come to the end of the earth. It was so sweet. Then we hiked in 2.5 miles. They got a good workout, believe me. But
Jerry, friends of mine hiked to this place a couple of years ago, and I thought they mentioned that they had to apply for the permission to go and that only a few people got permission. And they were really excited when theirs came through. So I think the National Park Service might be limiting the number of
Yes,
guests.
this is the way it works. It's the BLM, it's the Bureau of Land Management, and they open up the permits for each day on the first of the month, 6 months prior. So let's say on the 1st of May, coming up next week, they'll open up the permits for November of this year, for the entire month of November. with
Uh-huh.
the calendar. And they'll probably all be gone in 15 minutes. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think they allowed, the last time I looked was a while ago, they allowed 8 per day. And they get grabbed up. And then there is a multi-agency BLM, NPS, whatever, ranger station about 20 miles south of Kanab, Utah, on Route 89, just above the highway on a little hill. And they do have a couple of 3 or 4, maybe it's less than that now, same day walk-in permits. So if you get really lucky. Now, the bad news is that by the time you get the permit at 8 or 9 a.m. and then drive an hour and then hike 2.5 hours, the light's already over.
Mm.
It's for that day. So you need to do it in advance. The good news is that in the spring, which is a good time to go, April, May, I wouldn't, maybe the first week of June, after that it gets too hot. Go in and the light does not come onto the whole thing. As you see, it's very evenly illuminated until about 2.5 hours after sunrise. Because if you get there too soon, you will find a shadow right across it and you're not going to get a good shot. So on the one hand, you don't want to be too early. On the other hand, you will beat the other people there. If you get there early, sit and wait, set up your tripod and wait for the light. And as my great friend and mentor, David Mutual, always says, shoot through it, meaning start shooting before it's good and keep shooting until after it's over. And somewhere in the middle, you will probably get the shot. But the mantra is shoot through it. So it has been limited for a long time, years and years. Okay. They were talking about opening it up. I tried once to get, I had a congressman who was on the committee that oversaw the BLM. I had him sitting in my office once begging for me to give him an assignment. He wanted to do me a favor. I asked him to get me helicopter landing permits so I could get in there with my friend with AFib, and he couldn't do it. Another story. Who else? Okay, so to reiterate, I said this was going to get repetitive. I want to prove I didn't lie. Moving the A and B curves inward to different degrees of emphasis will accentuate one color over the other per the degree of the steepness of the curve. The whole thing is about the color balance. If you start with an existing white balance and you move all the points inward the same degree, you will maintain around the center point, you will maintain the same white balance. You can obviously change them to different degrees. Break up all 4 colors equally, just do it the way I did it, very simply with the same steepness on all the curves. Let's try a different image with something else. Fortunately, I think I got this right. Okay, let's close this one. Let's close that one. Clean up some of this mess. Okay. This one should be interesting. This is Lower Antelope Canyon years and years ago, before the Navajo on whose land this sits really over-commercialized it. So there is a good color contrast here for the simple reason that where the light's hitting, it's warm. And where these formations are in shade, they're bluish purplish. So obviously the light moves quickly and these things change. So if we open this in Photoshop, and let's make it a little bigger, I guess. And we go into the orthodox means of converting it, convert to profile, everything. Oh, here's Adobe RGB, Lab, Ace, Relative, Black Point, Dither, Preview. Okay, now we are in LAB. So let's go to Adjustments and Curves and go to the A channel. Now there's really no green in here, but let's move the red over to the quarter tone and the green to the quarter tone to maintain the white balance. And I'm bisecting the grid. And go to blue and yellow in the B channel. To the same quarter tone, everything is uniform for the sake of a simple example, which happens to work really well. And go to the L channel and just pop this a little bit. I don't want to get too crazy. And do that. Now, I grant you, this is a little washed out in the center, but we're going to fix that. Let's knock this down. How about that? 75, 74%, call it 75. Now, since this is a little light, let's take a black brush. Let's get the default colors and brush with black, and this is 50%. And I could make the image bigger, but let's just make a smaller brush and knock this down. But if I went into RGB and I made a curves layer, I can't do it here for the simple reason that I'll have to flatten the whole lab thing. Excuse me. My throat is getting dry. Bear with me. Please, 1 second. One sip. My kids growing up always thought I just wanted to hear myself talk. I guess most kids feel that way. They were wrong. So if we went into RGB, I could just knock this brightness down a little bit. But the point being the color here, and you can see, this is okay, but it's flat. This picked everything up. So we've got saturation without loss of detail. We're breaking up the monochromatic colors. We're creating a contrast. It's sharp as heck. And we have a great color contrast between the shadow and the highlight. Every 5 minutes, these colors change. If anybody's ever been in there, you know how fast these things can move. It's a great thing to do when you're in the area for the simple reason that you do this in the middle of the day, except in the golden hour, because you need the sun overhead coming down through this narrow little slot. Anybody else? Yeah, we talked about the eyedropper tool. We talked about blending modes.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that several times getting the color balance right, and
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but I understand color balance, but getting it right in terms of in Photoshop, I understand it in the camera or like that, but I don't understand what is right.
Okay. Okay. Good question. Okay. Let's go into something else. And I'm going to try to file, open recent. Let's see. Okay, here, this is an example. Okay, so we have a snowy egret and green foliage. This bird is white. And right here, he's really white. Actually, I think he's a little too bright. Oh, the whites are already knocked down. Let's knock down the exposure a little bit. That gives him a little more detail. Now, this is what I mean. If we go into whatever you use to start as a raw converter, you have the temperature slider, which is blue and yellow. This is far too yellow. This is far too blue. It's a color cast. Then we have the tint slider, which is red and green, probably really red and green and magenta. And we can turn this magenta or green. Now, there's a color cast. I hope you can see that the bird looks green now. Okay. The idea is this. This is custom. Custom pops in anytime you change it from where you started. If we go, for example, to auto. The idea, the theory is, if you can get something that is absolutely dead on white, to be white on your screen, again, assuming that your monitor is right on point, then theoretically, in actual practice and theory, all the other colors, red, green, blue, what have you, are going to fall where they should without a color cast.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you do not have the white, or actually, when I say white, it's called white balance, but it refers to both white and neutral gray, because very often you're dealing with 18% reflectance. You're not going to find white pixels in a lot of nature images. This happens to be a white bird, but that doesn't happen every day. So if you can get the white to white and or the neutral grays neutral without a color cast, that's your starting point.
Okay, got it.
Okay, and you can do that in any number of ways. First of all, you have these profiles, which can be helpful or obnoxious. You have the white balance. If you set your camera, what kind of light do you normally shoot with?
Sorry, what'd you say?
I'm sorry?
I usually shoot auto white balance.
Good. That's an excellent starting point. It may not be perfect all the time, but it's excellent. I mean, assuming you have a sophisticated camera, I would definitely use auto white balance. I used to shoot at 5,000 Kelvin because I had my eye trained to shoot Fuji Velvia, and I could see the color of the light, but I've gotten off that, and I'm pretty much most of the time on auto white balance. Then you have your tint and temperature sliders. Then, if you need more help, you can go into the color mixer. Unfortunately, not in masking, but in the global changes. And you can change in the raw converter the hue. So if you go here and I go down to green, you can see on the slider, this makes the greens greener and this turns the greens toward yellow. So you can alter, you can affect the color like that. But yes, correct white balance means starting with whites white and grays gray. And presumably and hopefully, unless there's some untoward side effect, then the greens, reds, blues, and everything else should fall where they should.
Okay, thank
And
you.
Jerry, if you don't have white or gray in your image, such as with your canyon image, do you just need to rely on your memory and your eye?
Yes, and this again, it presumes if you shoot on auto white balance, the camera's helping you. If you bring it into a raw converter and put it on auto, that will help you to give you a place to start. It may not be perfect, but it's a place to start. Now, let's not forget, you have a choice. You can create a documentary photograph that's exactly what it was, or to the best of your recollection, or you can create your own subjective work of art. Now, if we go back for a minute to they changed the number. If we go back to this image for a minute, if I were to go to impacting the color, let's say with the A channel, and make the reds predominant, whoops, come on. Who's to say that I'm wrong or a liar? The blues have turned purple, the reds have turned claret or something, and the yellows are far redder than they were for the simple reason that I pumped up the red of the four color selections in the two channels. I pumped up the reds to a much greater degree than the other three. So I've got a real red bias going here. This is a red color cast. If I want to do that, I can do it. If I were doing my box of Ritz crackers, I'd be fired. In a minute, I'd be out of the building before lunch, because that has to be a critical match. With this sandstone, hey, who's to say it isn't? I have a friend in California, great guy. He makes images of these rocks, psychedelic colors with all kinds of splotches and blotches and crazy, and he sells them to calendar companies like Hershey bars. That's art. That's his interpretation. It's not natural, it's not accurate, but it's an interpretation. So this is probably a more accurate way of proceeding, but it looks a little stilted right now. I got used to the other one. So if we grab the red, that's too much, and go back to lightness, I can play with the opacity. But who's to say that when the sun struck that inner rock right in here, that it didn't look like this? To be honest with you, it probably did. So yes, to go back to your question, it's a question of accuracy and recollection. And if, again, I hate to be this redundant, if your monitor is right and your camera is right, you can replicate what you saw, but you don't have to.
Okay, thank you.
It's the old story of the bride in the white wedding gown. The white has to be white, and everything else will fall into place. There aren't a lot of white wedding gowns down in these slot canyons. I'm trying to think if I would accept that answer when I say who's going to know. Pardon me. Would I accept that answer? I don't know, but it seems it sounds logical to me right now.
Thank you, Jerry. This has all been fantastic. Are you planning to demo any other images, or are you
Well,
wrapping up?
we could. I have an idea. Let's go back to open something else. Let's see what else I prepped. Come on, come on, come on. Which one was Sunrise Point? I don't remember. There's a good, Ostrom Point is a good one. It's a lot of red rock, I know, but that's my life. Okay. So if we go to as shot right here, this is what the camera saw. And if I open this in Photoshop, now we have what's normally considered in the vernacular a real color contrast, because we have a red rock, it's called Gunsight Butte, and blue water and some blue in the sky. So if we go into, again, curves layer, go to edit, convert to profile, lab color, ACE, relative colorimetric, black point, unchecked dither, preview is checked, click OK. We come into lab, just to make sure. Let's go here and here. And sure enough, it's a 16-bit image in lab. This actually was shot with probably a 617 camera. So I'm going to move this over. The aspect ratio that you see is what there was. I mean, this, as you can see, to make a panoramic, this geometry of the subject probably lends itself very well to that kind of a thing. I think you'll agree, I hope. Okay, so we're now in lab adjustments, curves, and we repeat the same thing. Whoops, sorry. The A channel. Now, if we want to make sure that we're moving everything the same way, put a point in the center and get these, whoops, get these two numbers to agree. So we're in the center. And the idea is to get the points in the corners of the red, the green, the blue, and the yellow to revolve or rotate, if you will, around that center point. Pretty accurate. Go to the B channel, blue and yellow. Come on, come on, come on. Quarter tone. Go to lightness. Make a little S curve. Nothing too drastic. And you can see we've got contrast, we've got color. Is it too much? Yes, I think so. I don't know. I'm
that's-
hoping that everybody can see.
That's not opacity, that's fill.
Oh, sorry. I wonder it didn't work. I'm hoping that everybody can see basically what I see. And knock this down 68%. Looks reasonable for a magazine. The reds are really red, the blues are really blue. You can bring it up or bring it down. This is Gunside Butte, this is Lake Powell, and this is Navajo Mountain, which you can see from everywhere. And this is a place called Ostrom Point, for which you need a four-wheel drive, and you drive through big water and keep going toward the lake. Any other questions? Anybody? I was
This is,
hoping for more.
hello.
Yes.
Hi, this is Patsy.
Hi.
And I came in late. I had a problem signing on is all. But I didn't get the reference book you were speaking of, the name of the author.
Okay, the author is Dan Margulis, Margulis.
Thank you.
The original book is called Photoshop LAB Color, and the subtitle is The Canyon Conundrum.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Meaning Red Rock of the
Red Rock.
Southwest, and how do you break up the reds? That was the first version. That was, I believe, somewhere around 2006. I saw it the other day. I checked, it's on Amazon. And there is a version 2 that I think was about 2 or 3 years later. I think they're both out of print, I assume.
Okay, thank you. I'm presuming the library or something might.
I don't know. But if you
I
want to
was
see
able to order it on Amazon.
if you want to at least see the cover, it's on the Amazon website. And
Okay.
Kathy just said that she recently, or she had ordered one on Amazon. Kathy, did you get the first version or the second version?
I'm not sure, I'd have to check.
Okay, not to worry. Anyway, to echo what Kathy said to me by email several months ago, that it's dense. Believe me, it's really dense. You don't need 80% of what's in that book unless you're working in the pre-press industry.
No.
If you're doing nature and portrait photography, you can do very, very more than adequate with everything we've done here tonight. And he talks about the info palette and the numbers and matching the numbers. Yeah, if you want to match blue 1 to blue 2 to blue 3 to blue 4, you're going to need all the same numbers and formulations in RG and B in the info palette. You will, but we don't have to do that. In my opinion, I've done very well for umpty bump years doing it by eye trusting in the calibration of the monitor.
Thank you. That is enlightening.
No pun intended. The worst pun of the evening was mine when I said behind the curve. I didn't, that, I don't know, I have no idea where I got that one. Okay, so I'm just going through my notes, the blending modes. We can try other blending modes. There's no harm. I've used normal, but just to see what this does, we could look at saturation, which isn't a lot different. There's overlay, which I don't think is going to work out too well. No, here's overlay. You know what? It's not terrible if we knock the opacity down further. I mean, what is overlay? It's really adding contrast. Actually, I think that's pretty nice from what I'm seeing. Where am I now at 36%? Maybe about there. I think that's pretty good without being over the top. So there are other options. There are definitely other options. Blending modes. Tweaking the key is tweaking the opacity. Just slide it back and forth. And the beauty, to harken back to something that was discussed earlier, the beauty to saving big files with lots of layers is that you can come back a week later and look at it and very often say, my goodness, what was I thinking? What was I doing that day that made me do it that way? Gee, I'm going to change it. I'm going to throw away a layer. I'm going to turn layers on and off. I'm going to change opacities. I'm going to change settings. It's totally non-destructive. By all means, I urge you, I beseech you to use a non-destructive workflow. Shoot in RAW, process it minimally in a RAW converter, and bring it into layers in Photoshop and use everything non-destructively. And when you brush on a mask, increment the opacity of the brush. Not only the opacity of the layer, but if you use a brush, increment the opacity of the brush. Instead of making one pass at 100% and being obvious, knock it down to 25% and make 4 or 5 passes. You're not going to exceed 100. Make 4 or 5 passes. It will be much more subtle. You will hide your fingerprints and the viewer will not see it. At the same time, I also have another little technique. If I brush on a mask and I can't see my color picker because I've hidden, whoops. Okay. Oh, come on. What happened? Oh, I see what happened. I have a black brush at 26%. And let's say I want to hide the adjustment right here in this area. Not that I would, but let's just say hypothetically. So now I have gray, I affect it again. Every time I click up and down on the mouse, it increments to 26%. So here we are over 100%. And you can see that change is now gone. I'm now back to the original dull color. So if we look at, again, we did this, the mask, we can see it's pretty soft because I use a soft brush. It's a soft edge. One little final touch is a little finishing touch. When you have a layer mask like this, make sure you're on the mask, not the layer. Go up to filter, go down to blur, go to the very famous Gaussian blur, set the radius at about 3 pixels, give or take, and click OK. What will that do? That will blur the edge of this mask even slightly more so that it's even softer and it's virtually indetectable. Now, even though you can plainly see the difference in the color from where the mask is to where it's white, you can't see the transition. It's so subtle. There's no line, there's no edge. And that's just another nice little finishing touch. It takes another couple of keystrokes, but if you want to make a big print and you want to hang it on the wall and you have a client who is valuable and worthwhile and you want to send out the best product out the door that you possibly can, I would add that finishing touch.
That's this has all been very enlightening, Jerry, and we are all appreciative. Let's make one last check with everyone. Does anyone else have a question for Jerry?
Hi, Jerry. This is Farzine. I have a quick question again.
Yeah.
Maybe a little redundant, but just to wrap it up. So when you are printing your picture, or let's say you're sending your file to a print shop or a client, do you
Right.
have to reconvert it back to Adobe RGB or CMYK or RGB, or do you leave it as lab color?
Okay, I only send out RGB, and here's my reasoning. CMYK is strictly for offset printing. If you're going to send something to a publication, a magazine, or what have you, they get an RGB file, they know what to do with it, believe me. They're production people. If they need to convert it to CMYK, they'll take care of it. I don't know of any printer that prints in LAB. The standard today, generally speaking, and I'm sure there are as many exceptions as anything, is RGB, Adobe RGB 1998, 300 DPI, and 8-bit. Now, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't convert it from 16-bit to 8-bit until the very end. I would sharpen, I would size it, sharpen it, do everything in 16-bit, and then flatten it, and then convert it to 8-bit. Because if you convert it to 8-bit earlier, then the changes that you make after that will be in 8-bit. You can't go back. So do that last. And generally speaking, most commercial printers will tell you send a JPEG. Why? Because it's a smaller file and it's easier for them to handle, and it goes over the internet faster. I would prefer to send a TIFF. And if it takes a few minutes longer to upload and download, so be it. But I know that I will get a better quality out of an uncompressed file than a compressed file. And if I have to send something out as a JPEG, it's always the highest quality level 12, always, with no exceptions. So my stuff is on the internet. I have an article coming out on photographing in the Southwest, and my stuff is here and there, and I always use 1990 Adobe RGB 1998. Now, sRGB is great for the internet. People are going to look at it all over creation, and their devices are not calibrated, and it's going to look better in a smaller gamut color space, such as sRGB, even though it's narrower than it will be in Adobe RGB 1998, for the simple reason that their devices are not calibrated. If you're sending it to somebody whom you know is calibrated, then you can get away with Adobe 1998 RGB. Otherwise, send it out sRGB. One last comment. Even on my website, the files that clients download and license are in Adobe RGB 1998. But the JPEGs that appear on the website, on the internet, on your devices, are flattened by the web hosting company to sRGB, because they know that it's going out to Aunt Millie in Sheboygan, and she didn't calibrate her iPhone. It's that simple.
Thank you for that, Jerry. That was great.
You're very welcome. Okay, my pleasure, my extreme pleasure.
You can probably stop sharing, Jerry, so we can see you as we say goodbye. And I
Yeah,
also
yeah.
wanted to say that Alan was kind enough to put a Amazon link to the book, I believe.
Oh, good.
And so if everybody take the opportunity to click the 3 dots and save the chat, might be some useful information to come back to there.
Good,
So
great.
thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Jerry, for all the preparation you did, and for taking us from the very beginning through several interesting demos. I think that we all learned a lot, and we appreciate your sharing your expertise.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm always happy to share, and I hope people enjoy it. Just to go back, well, I'm not sharing. If you want to go to jerryginsberg.com, you'll find my contact information there. Anybody with a question, please feel free.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Archie, for being our producer tonight. And
And
hope,
co-host Alan, always got to give a thank you to Alan there. Thank you.
and
Thank you all
co-host
very much.
Alan. And I hope we'll all stay in touch on the internet.
Yep.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.